that gives the PS the power to nominate members to the National Committee as she thinks needed. And my proposal is that it ought not to be a decision of the PS as she thinks, but that every parish committee should have a representative on the National Committee.
Mr. Chairman, I anticipate that part of the objection is going to be that it's going to be too large and cumbersome. But at the same time, having regard to my own experiences with attending committee meetings, sometimes you can't even get a quorum. And I think if the overarching effect is the interest of the child, and we can get feedback from the parish committees, then it might really enhance the efficacy of these committees, and the national oversight body would be much better informed. I think that one must also, when considering this, look at the role of the Child Diversion Committee, which is really extensive. And therefore, the National Oversight Committee...
The proposal is that the National Oversight Committee include a person nominated from each of the parish committees. Minister.
Mr. President, I will consult with my technical people and...
Just do that quickly so we can move on. I don't want to keep coming back to it. It's not rocket science, you know. Put somebody, the proposal is to put somebody, one member proposed from each of the parish committees.
The ministry is not supporting that, sir. They figure it will be too large a committee, so...
Mr. Chairman, if that is the best that the ministry can come up with in terms of a reason, then it is, I'm sorry, it's highly unacceptable. That can't be the reason, because if this committee is supposed to work effectively, then you need to have a natural feeding into from the ground. And in my mind, the best person to do that would be the persons who sit on the parish committee, who have to do the research, who have to interface with the children. I mean, really, who else? And I'm sorry, but the technocrats at the ministry, unfortunately, I don't believe that that reason can be acceptable at all.
Probably this is where the county suggestion could come in. Perhaps you could have a representative from a county, which be... no, but they could feed into that one representative to cover the county, to add 3 more rather than 13. Right? So I'm proposing to the technical people to facilitate...
You don't need to propose to the technical people, you propose to us.
Oh, we propose to... Can we accept that then?
No, that's a clarity. You have that, but remember the purpose of a committee is for information to flow both ways. But you don't have them sitting as a county. So to say no. Let me make the point. So you have to put a clause in there now, or something that they have, because if you have one rep for the county of Middlesex, and I sit in that national body, what mechanism will be used to send information to Manchester and Clarendon, for example? If the rep is from St. Catherine?
Senator, I take it that the person who is representing the counties, that person would recognize their responsibility to take instruction from the relevant parishes.
Right. But why you need to change
but they don't
need...
Mr. Chair,
I am not convinced that it needs changing.
The bill doesn't speak to that.
Chairman, I'm not convinced that it needs changing. I mean, this is a very all-embracing committee. The permanent secretary appoints people to represent some. It means then that, you know, I think it is quite adequate.
Mr. President.
I'm not changing it at all.
I beg to disagree on the adequacy, because I see where the role of the Ministry of Justice, but I don't see defined the role of the Ministry of whichever deal with child in current situation, youth. So therefore, I think that at least some consideration should be done for the ministry that have responsibility for youth.
Minister with responsibility for conducting this exercise, you need to make a decision as to what you're doing and let's move forward, because if you sit here, you're going to end up with somebody from the Airports Authority on it shortly.
Yes, Mr. President, but I'm trying to get, my suggestion is to move on and come back to it. You don't want to move on.
I'll recommit.
Might as well do that, because...
So there's I'll move on. Senator Crawford, I'm moving on, you know. We are to come back to 2 and 7. 2 and 7. I'm going to note that so that I don't forget it. 2 and 7. All right, so 8 now. There's an amendment to 8 on the amendment sheet. So can I put the amendment? No, I'm going to put the amendment first and then the clause. Okay. So the amendment is on the sheet. So I'm going to first of all put the amendment. Yeah, we're supposed to come back to 7. So I put the amendment to clause 8. Those in favor?
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Clause 8. The minister may recommend, and I am proposing that it should be mandatory, that the minister establishes a national committee. It should not be an option. Particularly because you are not minded, Minister, to accept the representative.
No, Council, but I'm saying, as a legal luminary. They agree? We are conceding the point. We will make the amendment to say shall.
Okay, fine. So that's 8-1. So let me first of all put the amendment which is on the amendment sheet. Those in favor? Aye. Against? The ayes have it. And the proposed amendment to 8-1 would read, the minister shall establish a national committee, and so on. Those in favor of that amendment? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. So I put clause 8 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to bring your attention to the D, 2D, because it goes back to exactly the point we were discussing, where it says that if required by the permanent secretary with responsibility for justice, a member of a child diversion committee nominated by that child diversion committee shall sit on it. But I'm not clear. I'm just seeking some clarification about that clause in light of the discussion which we just had about the parish, the actual parish child diversion committee sitting on the national oversight. Because this seems to contemplate
actually the point. They were explaining to me that the matter of the composition had been thoroughly considered, and this is across administrations while this was being considered. The bill was being worked on. They had looked at having parish representatives. They had looked at different formulations, and it was determined that that would make the body too large and unwieldy, different implications, but that they would build in some flexibility. And this point that you have they actually just pointed this out to me. This is one of the sort of an aspect of the discretion of the permanent secretary to exercise, where there would be an additional representation. So they have considered it. It's not that this is now coming to the fore and we're not taking your view on board. It is that they have been working on how should this body be properly composed, size-wise, the relevance of the qualification or location of the person to the matters being considered. It had all been considered, so that the final position is as it is now set out here. So it's just not that I understand that you have a different view as to how it should be composed, but I want to just suggest, I know that I heard you saying that you just don't think it's acceptable that the technocrats would put this forward, but it is in fact a considered position and has been accepted by the relevant minister, the relevant ministry, and it has been passed in this and recommended for us for review. the ministry does not consider that it should be amended in the way you have suggested, this is the proposed structure. So when we return to that, we can address that point again if you wish to relitigate the point, but it is as it is. So thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'm not convinced, and unfortunately I cannot accept that excuse. I'm not. To me, if the excuse that is being given, Minister, or if the reason that is being given, if the reason that is being given is that it is going to be too large, I really just do not find that to be an excuse, an acceptable reason. Not the well, that's the explanation that you have given, and I really do not accept that. But if you were to look at the provision, the specific provision raised by Senator Motley at 8.2d, it says, if required, the permanent secretary with responsibility for justice may appoint or may have a member of the Child Diversion Committee sit on the National Committee. I wondered, Minister, how do you determine, Minister Reid, or how does a permanent secretary determine when it is required? I mean, really, who determines that? What are the guidelines in making such a determination?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a personal hearing, a committee where when the matter becomes relevant to a particular group or an interest group, you bring that particular representative on board. So I'm just saying, administratively, you would have to exercise your discretion if required. So in other words, if you're dealing with a matter where you want feedback from a committee, a child diversion committee, then at that point you request representation, as I'm saying, which is normal.
So if one were to accept what you're saying, then, Senator Reid, and I don't wish to prolong, but I'm trying to get some understanding, but if one were to accept what you're saying, by reading it says, a member of the Child Diversion Committee, which means that at any one point is only one member. So assuming that an issue comes up that affects the operation of the program, or as I understand this, the PS can only invite one member from a committee, so you can invite St. Catherine, but you cannot invite Kingston, or you cannot invite St. Thomas. If what you're saying is how you wish to operate, then perhaps you need to change the wording to say such members of the Child Diversion Committee as the PS sees fit.
So what is there, Senator Fraser-Binns? I'm going to put the clause, so if there is a proposed amendment, you can put it forward. Yes, Senator Knight.
This is just for information. Under 8.2, page 11. Yeah. And it's saying the permanent secretary in the ministry with responsibility for justice, who shall be an ex officio member and the chairperson of the National Child Diversion Oversight Committee. And I'm just wondering, do ex officio persons vote? I think not. And so here you are having a non-voting member.
The chairperson votes?
No, that chairperson. No. 120.
Sorry, Senator Knight. The question is that I do report progress and seek the leave of the Senate to sit again. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. Leader?
Mr. President, I ask for suspension of the standing orders to allow the Senate to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider to continue the consideration of the clause by clause of the Child Diversion Amendment Act 2018. Child Diversion Act, yes, 2018. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it.
Yes, I'm just wondering if, as I said, the ex officio member votes. If the answer is yes, then fine. If the answer is no, then some difficulties could arise because the chairperson is a tiebreaker. So who then would be the tiebreaker? If the ex officio is a non-voting.
The chair has a casting vote on the sub 7, no?
No, but the chairman is the the permanent secretary.
Right. So
no, but the first question, what's it? If an ex officio member has a vote.
the ex officio doesn't necessarily not have a vote. Right. So I understand from the scheme that they do, and then a casting vote in the circumstances.
No, if the answer is yes, then my issue is settled.
Currently is yes, Senator Knight. So I will now put the clause.
Mr. Chair.
No, we put the amendments already, no. Senator.
Yeah, I'm just recommending, in for good order, that the PS doesn't be the chair for this committee. Because at the end of the day, when there are issues of governance, the PS is one that has to call in to deal with those issues in the governance framework. So if there are issues in this committee, then who do you appeal to when the PS is the chair of the committee? So, no, so and then the PS will want to appoint a member to the committee. I don't believe in good governance structure that the PS would chair a committee, because the committee reports to the chair of the ministry, generally speaking. So why, I know in many other committees, you have an extra member of the PS or the PS nominee, but for the PS to be chairing a committee under his or, when in this context, her very own ministry, I want more clarification on that.
Because saying, I take the point, but the clause also allows for the permanent secretary to name a public officer within the said ministry of justice to be chair. No.
In absence, the PS will be the chair.
They didn't, but the clause is before us doesn't say in the absence. Come on. It never said so. It doesn't say so.
No, let's read the thing. The permanent secretary in the ministry with responsibility for justice, who shall be an ex officio member and the chairperson shall. A public officer in the ministry. Mm-hmm. So what? So then why you shall?
It says she's a chairperson, full stop.
You can't be shall an hour.
Full stop, that's all.
Flows some virtue of her holding the office of permanent secretary. That's the basis of the ex officio.
So as the
No, she shall be the chairperson.
Read thing good.
She shall be an ex officio.
It is saying she shall be and the chair. Then no, this person or a public officer in the ministry. So is that public officer in the ministry the person who shall be the chair?
No.
Something is wrong.
What you want, Judge?
In fact, what Senator Skeffrey said, remember, I can't remember the particular statute now, but there was a move away from having the permanent secretary be a member of a board. And so what? No, but then, no, the permanent secretary has a nominee on the board. And in this situation, it is saying that the permanent secretary shall be the chairman. So it doesn't flow with the use of the word or.
They are.
But you know, it's a matter if you know, I'm not, like I said, not fighting this to the last drop of my blood. Yeah. Neither should you fight to your last breath.
I don't think it would be worth a drop of either, quite frankly. But so if 2A is being taken to be read together with 3. So the permanent secretary, so there are 2 issues. One is the technical point that is being made about ex officio and the nominee, and then there's the other that is substantive where you're saying you have a governance concern with the permanent secretary being the chair. So that's a policy issue. That's what's come to us for recommendation. Policy, we have to deal with policy. We don't make policy on the fly in the Senate as much as it is important for all of us to have our view on both sides and to do our best to create the best legislation possible. It still is a fine line in us balancing the matter of policy. It is the Minister of Justice who has executive responsibility for this particular, for the policy making for this particular piece of legislation, as much as it may frustrate you in accepting proposals that are put forward. So that's the issue on the position of the permanent secretary as chair. In terms of the technical issue, so...
No, it's not a technical issue. Oh. What I'm saying is that also is that it may be in conflict with other pieces of legislation, the Public Bodies Management and something like that.
Where would it come? I'm not
because the PS, I think that statute was the one that caused the removal of the permanent secretary from several boards falling under that person's ministry. And but this is the age of technology. They can quickly bring it up, check it, and while they're checking it, we can move on.
Let's move on.
The consensus is contrary to my instinct, but nevertheless, we move on to 9.
Before we move on, Chairman, perhaps we could put my proposal, as we have done some others.
Yes, okay.
2D. And the proposal is that...
Back to 2?
No. Hey, 2D. The proposal is...
We have dealt with 2 amendments.
Yes, we have.
So this is a third. What's the proposal?
Yes. I'm proposing that the section reads, if required by the permanent secretary with responsibility for justice, such members of the child diversion committees nominated by those committees. By that committee? But I can leave the technical team to refine it, but that's the idea.
So can we put it, Minister? Oh. Giving the permanent secretary some flexibility.
mind, while we're considering that, remember the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Justice is also the chair of the Trafficking in Persons Committee, and that has worked very well for quite some time. There are some other situations. So perhaps where the issue is not necessarily the chairing of a board which has financial responsibilities, as opposed to this type of coordination of interministerial activity or social contribution. Perhaps it's viewed differently, because I don't recall it being one of the issues that had come up. But we'll wait for them to come back. But that's the analogy that I think might be appropriate.
But
to say
in
that
relation,
it's not the same governance issue.
In relation to the pluralization, members.
Amendment is accepted.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. So the proposal is that if required, the permanent secretary with responsibility for justice, members, but I prefer such members, such members of the Child Diversion Committee. No, it's A. It has to be A. Yes. So the proposal you have heard from Senator Fraser-Binns. Thank you very much. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. So I'm going to go on to 9. And then before I put the entire clause, correct? So there's an amendment to clause 9 on the amendment sheet, and it seems to be a number of housekeeping issues, really. So I put the amendments to clause 9. Those in favor?
Speak on 9.
Against?
No.
Hold on. The amendments I've dealt with, but you can speak to 9 differently now. Go ahead, you know.
Yes, Chair. 9D.
9D.
Yes.
With the consent.
With the consent of the child, which shall be given in the presence of, and it gives 3 options: parent, adult, and the attorney at law. I think.
What? The parent, guardian, the parent or guardian?
Yes. Give 3 options. No, I said an attorney at law. One of the options.
So the first one is a parent or guardian, right?
Yes. The other one is an adult acting on behalf, and then the other one is an attorney
Yes.
at law. It is my opinion, sir, that if we should not restrict it to an attorney, then we open it to very uneven representation. I know you have good lawyers and bad lawyers, but the gap is not as open as an informed parent and an uninformed parent. And so, I'm saying that this says that a child can be basically represented by a parent,
yes,
by any adult agreed to by the parent, or by an attorney at law. I'm saying if we should accept any of those, meaning any one of, it opens a gate to very uneven representation to the child. Because a parent, I'm saying the gap between a good lawyer and a bad lawyer is not equal to the gap between an informed parent and an uninformed parent. And so therefore, a child who is represented by an uninformed parent is at great disservice if we don't say it should be by a lawyer who understands this thing, whether it is provided to him. No, I just want you to understand the point I'm making. You can agree or disagree. I'm saying that based on many circumstances, economic and otherwise, parental representation is not even. I'm saying a lawyer should be present. I'm saying then they provided by the state. But if it come to that, because you see, the person who will have a lawyer without conversation is who can afford it. They will always have a lawyer. But I'm saying there are going to be parents now who show up to the station and never even heard of child diversion. And then just say, and in fact, there will be people who say just take it because the second is worse. That child is exposed to unreasonable representation. And not only unreasonable, but justice must have some equity. I'm saying KD might be a good lawyer, Sophie a good lawyer, I might be a bad lawyer, but I'm trained sufficiently that the gap isn't so wide. Might not be the most suitable.
You would have to amend the Legal Aid Act. But no, there's a pool. It would, I suppose, the lawyers on the Legal Aid Act who are what they call them again, duty lawyers. Right?
Yeah.
Duty counsel.
Duty counsel.
You could perhaps just link it straight from this bill, just to just say that an attorney at law who may be a duty counsel as provided under the Legal Aid Act.
Senator Knight, what Senator Crawford is suggesting is something different. He's saying that the person would not be allowed to be represented by a parent. He would need a lawyer. That's what he's saying. A different argument that.
And that, Mr. Chairman, is the difficulty for me. Though I appreciate the concern, which again is similar in that you're trying to protect the integrity of the process and protect the child who is vulnerable, and you want the child to be able to have received optimum representation. The fact is, we still live in a system where even an adult who is in court accused of the most heinous crime can choose at that point to, protect them, to represent themselves. And the parent, I don't think that we should assume always that the parents would not have the capacity to make certain decisions. So it's a difficulty.
There's a position, because of when you interface with the government agencies, the average man, sometimes he's not equipped with information. They're not generous with information, and so that person may not find him or herself in the best position to represent his or her child. There is a point to it. It happens all the time where the parent.
A suggestion?
Yes.
Why don't you include the provisions about justice of the peace where the person is not represented by a lawyer?
Could be JPs who are trained.
Yes. Well, I'll take that as a secondary. But the point you made, the repercussion to the person who wants to represent himself lies with the person. The repercussion to the child don't lie with the person who chooses just to show up without information. I don't know if you have seen. All I'm trying to say is that there must be some equity under the law.
What you want is adequate representation.
So and that isn't guaranteed.
So the inclusion of the justice of the peace.
Senator Brown,
okay.
You would be happy with that? A parent along with a justice of the peace, which would be easier to access than a duty counsel.
You see, the problem with that is that who won't choose the JP?
Yeah. You want one?
They have duty. The only problem with what you're suggesting is we who are practitioners at the criminal bar have had on occasions to test the veracity of some of those
a lot of that has changed nowadays because of the quantity of just JPs and the training that they are now subject to. It's not like our days when they used to send for the JP next door.
No, Bill, I don't want to say that. I introduced that, Bill.
Would it serve the purpose if we say that the parent will be advised specifically before he or she chooses to act for the child, that he be advised that he's entitled to get a lawyer, so that, you know, because part of the issue I know in the system when you interface, if you go for bail or something and you don't know, you can come back 40 times because they will tell you each time you go back you need A, B, C, and D. Is the ignorance of the persons who are interfacing with the system, so they don't know, and therefore it puts them at a disadvantage. So I wondered whether if you simply give them the mandatory advice that they are entitled to opt for a lawyer, and probably do it in, you know, you could use one of the duty lawyers if they so choose. At least they would have made a conscious decision that, you know, they would know that they could get a lawyer, and if they choose not to have a lawyer, then you could proceed. It's better than just leaving it.
Mr. Braham.
The one thing I would add to what you're saying, Ransford, is this. Your right to a lawyer does not mean that you have the means to acquire a lawyer. Yet you have a desire. So this is why I was saying, if you put what you're saying there in, and also make the linkage between the Legal Aid Act, duty counsel, which it comes under Legal Aid Act, you know, I think you would solve the problem.
Mr. Chairman, just to indicate, I wonder if we're reading it correctly though, and Senator Knight, you can probably guide as well. This child that we're speaking of may very well have a lawyer, but in the cases of giving the consent, be accompanied by a parent or guardian. Because this is a child that is interfacing with the court, right? Or, well, not necessarily, but interfacing with a process, with the justice process, right? And this child is being given through this legislation an opportunity. It is not a circumstance where the child is going to be contemplating, or where the process is contemplating giving the child something that is more egregious. This is contemplating a diversion. The child is already suspected way before he even reached to the consent issue. Before you reach to the stage where the child would have to contemplate being accompanied by someone to give their consent, they would have already been suspected to have committed, charged with the commission of, or being convicted of. So I'm saying many of these children are children who would have already been fitted with attorneys. Many of them who would have been convicted, etc., would have been, I didn't say all, I'm saying many of them would be children who are fitted. So for those children who have been fitted with an attorney and who are at the stage where they are now contemplating consent, they may very well want their parent or guardian alone to be there. So I'm only putting it, Senator Crawford, so that we do not adjust the legislation to achieve curing a mischief and create another mischief, where somebody who doesn't have, for instance, the capacity to pay for a lawyer or to acquire a lawyer is now faced with having to pull themselves through a process in an elongated way, where they would have gone through being convicted and now just want to consent to a child diversion and have to get a lawyer to do that. You understand what I'm saying? All right.
But accept, however, that a lawyer's present don't negate a parent's present.
It is better to. What we're trying to do is to achieve the curing of the mischief, which is giving this child adequate representation. And so I'm just suggesting there is a better way to do that than to limit the persons who can represent the child in that context, because many of these children are children who may very well have paid for and received services from a lawyer, are at a stage where they already are about to be convicted and are being diverted and want their parent there. Fine. So what you're speaking of, how can we achieve that in saying the child should have adequate representation? Because that's what you really want.
May I try to just clarify where we are again, that in this section, this particular clause, this is not about representation. This is about ensuring that the child doesn't consent to participating in a child diversion process under duress. It's about making sure that there's an adult present, but it's not necessarily representation. It's not part of the process. It's about, this is now where a child has agreed to be part of, and that consent is part of, is given under 2C, right? So with the consent of the victim of the offense, if identified and located. What you don't want is for there to be duress because the child consents in absence of an adult or a trusted adult, whether that be someone nominated by a parent or whether it is an attorney at law or a guardian. I don't think at this stage it's about their representation in a, like as it would be when we think of representation in a case. It's about whether they're agreeing to participate in a process which is alternative to the criminal justice system. So I'm not so sure that the passion that is being brought to this issue of representation should necessarily be directed on this clause.
In other words, Minister, one minute, please. In other words, Minister, the consequence of the decision is not dire, it is to the benefit of the child.
Which is why I've said, which is why I used the, which is why Senator Johnson Smith, I use the words adequate representation, because at this stage, adequate representation could very well be the parent or guardian, right? So, and you would not, and I think, and when I think about it, because I agree with Senator Crawford, that, in the context of his concern, but in curing this mischief, we may very well create a greater mischief, where a child cannot have their parent with them, just to say, yes, I want to be considered. Remember, Senator Crawford, Chairman, the child at this stage is simply saying to the court, yes, I want to be considered for this program. That's what the child is saying.
Mr. Chairman, at this stage, the child is choosing one of two routes that exist to him: diversion or non-diversion. Yeah, man. So the child is choosing, is being asked to choose. Therefore, that child is being advised on the best route. Remember, we say on suspicion, you know. A lawyer could say to a child, no, there is no case against you. Go to court if it is necessary. What this thing is saying, you're likely to win. A lawyer could say that. Because let us not forget that there are repercussions to diversion. There are repercussions if him don't finish, there's repercussions, etc. So therefore, even if it's finished, because it's 3 strikes, he would have gone one of his 3 strikes. At the end of the day, all I'm saying here is that this child at this point is taking a decision. In fact, before, I have observed many a lawyer say to their people, admit to this crime and your time will be less, this would be less, etc., etc. Or say this was a manslaughter, it wasn't a whatever. I've seen lawyers on TV, and all I'm saying, sir, the level of representation, I disagree that representation is necessary here, and the level of representation, the disparity is too great.
Senator Crawford, look here. I hear what you're saying. I think all of us have heard. You have found some amount of support from Senator Bryan. But what I need to do, if we are going to make a change to it, my personal view, which I'm entitled to give, that there seems to be a lot of protection here for the child. Mother, father, somebody other than the mother, 1 minute now, somebody other than the mother or father proposed by the mother and father, which I don't see in any other legislation, and the lawyer. So it may be that if you have yourself and Senator Bryan want to put forward an amendment, put it forward, because we're kind of getting a bit bogged down on it.
Let's also remember the kinds of, the category of offenses that we're treating with. Also remember that. You have to remember all the full context. Even though I agree with the concern, I don't think it is necessary in this particular
Senator
case.
Charles, we hear what you're saying, and that's why I say if there is a proposed amendment, let us put it. If not, let's
I
move
form the view that the minister is not accepting the proposal. So we can move along, put it to the vote and move on.
Senator Reid, your intervention is required here.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman? Oh.
Mr. President.
Chairman. At 9, before the minister responds. Yeah, man, hold on there. There are two terms which I am seeking clarification for. I thought we were at 9. At 9.1, it says unless the public interest otherwise requires. I'd love to know who determines the public interest. Is this the constable? Is this a requirement of the courts? Who determines the public interest? It's not clear at what level. Also at 9.2b, it says if there's a prima facie case against a child, who determines? Is that a parish judge who would be required to determine that? So that, if you could clarify for me, who determines these important issues? The public interest and the prima facie, because it's not clear from the legislation to me. And could I just ask a third thing?
Sorry, 1 minute. We'll move on for the thing about the representation.
I thought you had.
No, but you don't have to vote on it. What is here is here. So you move on from that. So tell me what the problem is now.
I saw clarification, Chairman.
What a concern.
For at 9.1, it says unless the public interest otherwise requires. It tends to point to diversion, but I want to know who determines the public interest. Is it a judge? Is it some committee? Who determines that?
The person who interferes with it.
Secondly,
at a time. One thing at a time.
It might help if I just go to that.
And the other thing now is who determines prima facie. That is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's the other one. It's kind of, and then,
there, show me where it's there.
No, but Mr. President, my interpretation is that for participating in a child diversion program by the court or in the case of diversion offense specified in the first schedule of constable having a reason to suspect that a child has committed a diversion offense. So my understanding is that these are the two operatives which will always determine how the matter is treated. So they are, whether it's a court or a constable, a consideration of what is in the public's interest. I don't know that there's any other.
No, but if I may, Mr. Chairman, public interest is a general concept which is well understood. It is considered based on scope and purpose of the circumstances. If it is that the child is before the court, it will be determined by the person who deliberates a court. If it is that the child is before the constable, then the constable, who is a functionary, would be the one who would make certain assessments. That is the concept of public interest, unless I'm otherwise wrong. Prima facie.
Prima facie is up to the constable to decide.
Mr. Brown.
Sorry.
No, take me to it. Take me to it. Where are you? Take me to.
I put clause 9 as amended. Those in favor? One minute.
Chairman, which are you putting amendment by Senator Brown? Because I have a proposal for 9. I'm just.
1 minute. No, there was no amendment from Senator Brown. You know. Senator Brown sought a clarification and got it. You have an amendment to propose?
I do.
What is it? Let me hear it.
9.2, Chairman. I am proposing that we separate the situation where a child has been convicted from when a child is suspected of an offense and is to be put through the child diversion program. Because if, for example, if you look at 2C, if the child has already been convicted, why do you need to have the consent of the victim? If the child has already been convicted, why do you need the same convicted person to accept responsibility?
Because the restorative...
Because it is patent. Senator Charles, that's quite unlike you.
I'm responding. I thought it was a question she's asking.
I am, but I don't finish answering the question.
Go ahead.
Yes. So unlike you, you're usually so patient.
You get me excited to respond, that's all.
If the child has already been convicted, Chairman, then the child, by virtue of the conviction, there's a responsibility that has been accepted. And if the child has been convicted, you have broken my thought, then in my mind, there's no need for the victim to consent. So, in light of that, I'm recommending that the treatment be separated where the child has been convicted, what is to happen, and where the child has been charged or is suspected to have committed this offense.
Can I? My view. I think, Mr. Chairman, that it is this, even this House, we have discussed, Senators, the whole concept of restorative justice. This may not be the particular restorative justice bill in its title, but I think that it has, in all of its elements, great annex to the concept of involving and considering all parties, particularly based on the stage that this case would be at. It is asking for the justice system to respect all of the persons that have been impacted by the particular circumstance, including... But what offense would be committed by this process in saying to Jamaica that we want persons who are defined as victims of whatever it is that brings the process to the court or to the police station to be considered? I have heard from you, my opposition colleagues, several times that we should respect, as my other colleagues, that we should respect the processes and the considerations of all persons. I don't think that we do any offense to the legislation. Matter of fact, I think it substantively is a very good and positive move for us to consider all of the various perspectives in this situation.
And I support that.
We have looked at this provision already in a different form, you know. That is to say, consultation with the victim. And it is clear that it appears to me to be a policy issue. So if you have a proposal, would you put it so I can move on?
Policy issue that has been agreed by both sides.
Mr. Chairman, I will make my proposal, but I don't want anyone to get the impression, Senator Charles, that we are not for the victim having a say, because that is not what we're saying. In fact, in my own presentation, and I know my comrades, my colleagues, support that. We want the victim to have a say, and this law, this bill, does make provision for that. If you look at Section 16, there is provision for the victim to have a say. What I'm saying is, first, two things. One, that I don't believe that it should be contingent upon the consent of the victim, but we have already discussed that. So the second point I'm making is that particularly in a case where the child has been convicted, then perhaps we could review the provisions in terms of the child, although already convicted, has to accept responsibility and the consent of the victim is required. I'm saying let us just separate it from a situation where the child offender is suspected or is charged for the offense.
Suggesting that an offender could pre-conviction or at whatever stage would be properly treated with by the court or by the constable without consideration of the victim at this stage. But then in Section 16, you would have no difficulty with the victim trying to find it, giving their consent in that section. I'm trying to understand.
No, Senator Charles, I'm sure that is what you are saying. I'm not saying that.
No, I'm trying to get it. You're saying that you have no difficulty with the victim playing a role in Section 16, but you'd like to have the victim eliminated from Section 9? Pre-conviction, no problem. Post-conviction.
Minister, understand that you're not prepared to change this. Is that it? Senator Fraser-Binns, you want to put a proposal on amendment?
Mr. Chairman, and Minister Reid says he is not prepared to change. The simple proposal I made was that you should separate the instances where you have a convicted child offender and you have a child offender who have been suspected or who has been charged. They're two separate situations. But Senator Reid is not prepared to accept.
Senator Skepper has something to say.
No, that's to reinforce, because while we're not prepared to accept and you want to move on, but you have to think it through. At the end of the process, the court issue, not I'm saying, this very provision is creating a handicap in the objective you seek to achieve. What if you have a gridlock with victim and the offender? Then in that case, you end up having none of these cases or situation going toward a child diversion upon conviction. Is that the intent of the policy and the bill?
But the intent of the bill, and I know that...
Well, you know that we're going over and over and over, and I can't really allow this, you know. Because they said that the minister is saying that it's a policy, and everybody has made their point already. So I'm going to put... But they're not prepared to accept it, so. President not really supposed to. See, some notice passed. The president not really supposed to hear. That's not already. So I'm going to put section...
Mr. President, just one clarification. No. Can you allow me page 5, Mr. President, as a clarification, clause 2.5. In this act, where the consent of a victim is required and such consent is unreasonably being withheld, the matter may proceed to a diversion program if the court so orders.
You're correct. It is there, but note it says if the court so orders.
Yes.
So you then do the thing that you're trying to prevent, because the child is going to have to go through the court process before. So it's kind of just counterproductive, but we're not going to belabor it. I just don't think it
Thank you very much. We're not going to belabor it. So I put clause 9. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'm at clause 10. Those in favor?
President, on 10, I just want to make
10
is the one that have my fullest support. Because what it says, no, it says a child consent to participate in a child diversion program under this act shall not amount to or be treated as a confession or an admission of guilt for the purpose of any criminal proceedings.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown.
And the public needs to know that.
You're going to vote.
For this to work, the public needs to know that.
Senator Brown is going to vote twice on this one. Clause 10. Those in favor? Against? No, can I take 11 to 24? No, hold on, Senator Reid. Let me just move quickly then. Clause 11. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. 12. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. 13. Would you allow me to put it before you?
13, President. Yeah.
13. Those in favor? No, 13.
President. 13.1, I understand where it's saying. At 13.2, it says the child has up to 3 referrals. But 13.1 may limit that to only 1 referral. And I'm not sure who decides that, what are the factors that determine that you can't get up to 3 referrals. Because that 13.1 says a child may no longer be eligible to continue, right? No, 3, within 3 years. But 2 says you shall not be eligible beyond 3 referrals. So 3 referrals are possible, but 13.1 could limit.
As I understand, what's it saying, is within 3 years. So the first 13.1 is...
No, it says, or any other offense within 3 years after the date, but it says it kind of limits it to 1. I want to know who decides whether this particular child gets only 1. I know what 13.2 says you may get 3. 13.1 allows somebody to limit the child to only 1. And the question I'm asking is who decide whether this picnic, usually they would understand it, that this picnic, I thought child and picnic, you see? That's why you don't have the Queen thing too much.
And the Queen's Parliament.
What is Her Majesty's Parliament, so I understand. But I want my people out there to understand that their child, their picnic.
Assure you that your people out there, as you refer to them, understand child.
I want to reinforce it.
So, Senator, you understand. But I would imagine it's the same people who determine whether or not the program is available to the child in the first place. This is just a qualification on it.
No, you're saying it's the Child Diversion Committee that decides
No,
this?
I'm not sure.
Sure. We're rushing this thing, but we want to make sure that when the law is passed and it goes before the judges, they understand our intent well, because we too understand our intent. But I fear here that we don't even understand our own intent.
Chairman, I think that, I don't know if this is the same point, but there may well be a bit of uncertainty between the 2 clauses as to exactly how they will work. Maybe because of the lateness at the time, I'm sort of missing it. But a child may no longer be eligible to continue in a child diversion program or for participation in a child diversion program if the child commits or attempts to commit another diversion offense or any other offense within 3 years after the date of the commencement of a child diversion program. That's 1. 2, a child shall not be eligible for participation in a child diversion program after 3 referrals to a child diversion program. So in the first one, if you are in one and you commit,
you can't continue.
I'm not saying you have to delete it, but I am a little...
It's confusing. No. If a child commits, one is commits or attend commit an offense while you're in the program, that is one. You have a microphone. Right? And the second, for participating in a child diversion program, after 3 referrals to a child diversion program, meaning therefore any subsequent offense, you would not be eligible to be in a child diversion program.
If you commit an offense, Minister, maybe Charles, yes. Through you, Mr. Chairman, if you commit an offense in the 4th year.
So you're saying it says delete child?
If you commit, no, hold on, I'm trying to understand what word Minister Reid just read. So if you commit an offense in the 4th year of the first offense, then you are eligible for the program. But if you commit an offense within the 2nd year of the first offense, you're not eligible. Is that what it is saying?
I think I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that is what it's saying at all. Skeffrey, I am not even understanding your words. use your mic, please. A child may no longer be eligible to continue in a child diversion program. So what you're talking about, Senator Binns, for confirmation, you're contemplating if a child diversion program takes, hold on, man, I might be supporting you, you know. I just want to find, are you asking if the child diversion program goes beyond 3 years, right? And the child commits an offense in the 4th year, whether this would trigger? That's what you're asking? What are you asking? Well, the provision is speaking to ineligibility. So it is saying that if you have a child that has been diverted, and during the process of diversion, similar to if you're on bail, and while on bail you commit another offense, then you ineligible for bail.
You lose your rights.
If you are on the program, and while you are being diverted on the program, you're going to commit another offense.
You lose your rights.
Whether it is an offense which is one of the diversion offenses or any other offense, what it is saying is that you would be ineligible for the diversion because it wouldn't be working for you. Similarly, the next section says that a child who has been diverted over and over and over, clearly the diversion program is not working for you.
The difference that I have a little challenge with though, is that if you're in the program and you misbehave yourself, you lose your right immediately. If you completed the program, you have 3 strikes. You can, while the person who did not finish it, lose your right once and for all. It is clear, yes, but I'm wondering if that's what we intend.
No, but Mr. Senator
That's
Brian,
all I'm saying.
It's speaking to that particular child that particular program. I don't think that's subsection 1. Subsection 1, let us read it again slowly. I feel like a professor today. A child may no longer be eligible to continue. It's speaking to the specific program. Continue in a child diversion program. If the child commits or attempts, and it makes sense, if during the process of diverting the child continues to
Senator, it says or participate in a child diversion program. It says a child no longer be eligible to continue in a child diversion program. Eligible to continue, fine. Then it goes on, or for participation in a child diversion program.
Yes.
That is that the continue govern that too?
No, hold on. Which bill you're looking at? Is it the old one?
I'm sorry. I'm reading it wrong.
Just to point out that when this clause was considered in the lower house, what it said was that a child shall no longer be eligible. The position was that this is the case. They are immediately ineligible. And what they agreed was to change it to may, to allow for some discretion to be exercised in the circumstances of the matter. So that what you have is an adjusted situation now with a little more discretion, a little more flexibility. That's the position before us.
Chair, let me clarify something. If the child diversion program is for 1 year and the child completes that program, then it's not a question of participation. That person could be ineligible under 13.1, notwithstanding the completion. And what we're appealing for, it's not an opposition here, no. It's appealing for us to make it clear what is it we intend. Yeah. And so we frame and we draft the legislation for clarity, so that the judges and those who must be informed by the legislation knows our intent. Yeah. And it's the same point Senator Fraser Binns made about the conviction. If we take the time and construct the legislation properly, the clarity will be there.
I think that's what we all want, is to construct it together and make sure it is okay. But the issue, I just want to make it clear what my issue is that when you read subsection 1, if before the process is finished, you misbehave yourself, you lose your right once and for all. And I want to ensure, yes, that's what it says. The second one says, if you complete the program, you have 3 more opportunities or 2 more opportunities to do so, while the person who didn't finish it have no opportunity at all. That's all I'm trying to say.
So they're saying if you've gone through
and that's punitive.
what you earn, then you have another chance.
But most important, Senator Braham, can I, Mr. Chairman, can somebody knock the gavel, please? Mr. Chairman, you, in subsection 1, I think we need to consider the third word, which is may. And so perhaps it is providing an option for the person contemplating the gravity of whatever it is the child would have encountered during the process. I hear you. I'm not against what you're saying. I agree that a child who is in a program should not be just automatically pulled or barred from programs where other children are given referrals. I agree with that concept. What I'm saying to you is perhaps what subsection 1 is doing, because it doesn't say shall. Perhaps it is giving an option to the person deliberating on whatever the circumstances that child, the gravity of it. Suppose a child is diverted and then commits something that you say, no man, this person is not to be eligible for diversion again. Fine. So the question that I would have is, if it is that you have that context and consideration for a child during the program, is there something similar for children who have gone through and are now perhaps being considered for the program a second or third time?
The issue we face now is how do you, May? It gives an option. It gives an option.
Senator Charles, the may have that effect of discretion. Where I'm going is that, as it is here, a person could do 1 year of child diversion, complete it. Now, if you want to say, given the gravity of a subsequent offense, the discretion could be exercised. Let's say that.
Where are you saying I'm wrong?
No. Sorry?
You're saying that I'm wrong about the interpretation of the word may?
I'm not talking about whether right or wrong, no. I'm trying to focus on wording that will give effect to what you just said.
Okay, go ahead.
If what you are saying is that the gravity of a subsequent offense may exclude the child from diversion, another diversion, when Clause 13 to recognize you may have up to 3 diversions, then say that at 13.1.
Can I say something? I am just giving you, I put that forward. I submitted it as an example, a hypothetical. I am talking about the construction of the clause that is before us. And as the clause is constructed, the insertion of the word may gives a discretion between discontinuing the child along the program or barring the child from any future program. It does
why
not.
Why discontinue or why bar? It's not stated there. Nobody knows.
And I don't think that any legislation can contemplate the circumstances of the future factual event. What the legislation wants to do is to provide the person deliberating with enough room to say yea or nay. I'm not against what you're saying, I'm just putting forward my interpretation of the clause.
Chairman.
Because what we were, hold on, Senator Brown.
Because
what we were saying, to which I later agreed with you and with Senator Baines and with Senator Braham, is that the child, in this case in clause 1, who is diverted, is being disadvantaged when another child under subsection 2 would have recurring opportunities. And I'm just saying to you, this child in subsection 1, perhaps what we're doing is giving the person an option to say, if you get involved in an offense, remember, you know, it says any other offense, not just diversion offenses, which would be less than serious offenses. It could be anything. We're saying this child, you can either not continue on the program or be barred from any future programs. And my question is, if it is that this is the case for this child, what is it that the legislation is contemplating for the child under subsection 2?
Chairman, as I understand it, the policy is at 13.2 that you may have up to 3 referrals. We're not disagreeing with that. That's the policy. However, at 1, and in fact I believe we should just invert them and put 2 at 1 and bring 1 now, which is an exception to the policy of up to 3 diversion. There may be events where it is felt that there should be no more than 1. This person should not get up to the 3 diversion. That 1 diversion is enough. We must state that and give reasons or whatever so that guidance may be given to those who must adjudicate this as to the conditions that might prevent a child from enjoying up to 3. Because the policy seems to be at 3, for 3, up to 3.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's an agreement that we should not disadvantage a child who's in the program and run afoul of the law. So perhaps we can agree to delete subsection 1 and keep subsection 2, which shares the idea that each child is given 3 strikes.
No.
Okay.
The thing is that there needs to be some flexibility, and this is why the lower house changed it from shall to may. So there's a framework for the type of conduct that's expected when you're in a program, and for an assessment as to whether you continue to be an appropriate candidate to remain in a diversion program. And then we're all clear on 13.2, and this is why they changed from shall to may. And I think in those circumstances, I think if we start to pull at the threads of that, then you create, I'm not sure. I think the fact that it changed from shall to may, no, but that allows for the flexibility. The child may no longer be eligible to continue if they commit another offense. That's the fulcrum of it. That's where the issue turns. It's not shall. So you would allow for the offense, the conduct that took place, to determine whether this child should actually be in another type of program. It's not about disenfranchising in versus out. It is how you treat with offenders or offenses continuing while you're in a program.
Let me ask
the child also may continue. Based on this, you have more than 2 options. The child may also, just to clarify, Senator Brown, and to support it, when you say the child, the introduction of the word may as opposed to shall is instrumental in legislative drafting. What it is saying is that this may not even be contemplated. The child may continue. A child who offends may actually continue. You understand what I'm saying? I mean,
Chairman,
I think that we have really
Chairman,
one minute, Senator Brown, hold on a minute. I think that we have thrashed it. If it is that you want to make an amendment, you can put it for me, let me deal with it. Because I understand what that...
And I'd like to make that amendment, Chair, but it may be helpful if the Minister just clarify one thing for me. What is the policy if a child completes a diversion program and then commits another offense? Is it that that child would not be eligible for another diversion program when the 13.2 says you could get up to 3? So in other words, if the person's on a diversion program, commits an offense, that's one thing. But what if the child concludes the diversion program?
Yeah, it's 13.2.
But this is why I'm saying it's not clear.
But how much clearer could it be?
Before I say it is clear, it is not clear because 1 says the person may not be may not be allowed, and it doesn't take into account. So what I'd like to make as an amendment is that Section 13.1 does not apply. So that should become a 13.1A or 13.2, and you push 2 down. Section 13.1 does not apply where the child has already completed a diversion program.
But Mr. Chairman.
In other words, the child then have access to the tree.
The word continue. The word continue. I mean, I don't want to banter back and forth, but I think it's important because people are watching us, and part of what we're doing here is important for clarification of the details as per the standing orders. The word continue, Senator Brown, in the first sentence of subsection 1, clause 13, as proposed, that in itself says that the child would have been somebody who is on the program. So there's no need to do what you're asking, because if you say a child may no longer be eligible to continue, it must be somebody who had started it. A child may no longer be eligible to continue in a child diversion program or for participation. Well, remember, this is a child who is on a program, who has committed an offense, and who you're contemplating whether they would be suitable for another diversion program. And you're saying, you're giving the discretion that based on whatever the offense is, because it gives a wide amount, where the child commits or attempts to commit a diversion offense or any other offense. So it is attempt to commit or commit a serious or a less than serious offense. And that person, you may continue on the program, because it says may, which means you could well and be just continuing on the program, or depending on the circumstances, you may be stopped while you're continuing the program, or you may not be eligible for another program. That's what it's saying. It's giving you a discretion. It's giving the deliberator a discretion to determine how best to treat that child who has already interacted with this particular bill.
I think that you have been through that already. There is a proposed amendment from Senator Brown, which you may find useful and adopt it. It says it would be clause 13.1, or does not, section 13.1 does not apply to a child who has completed the program. That is the proposed amendment, as I understand it. Those in favor of that? Against? The noes have it. So I put section 13. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Thank you. I'm at section 14. Those in favor? Clause 14. Against? Ayes have it. I'm at 15. Those in favor?
Chairman?
Against? 15.
Yes, Chairman. 15G and 15I. Senator
G
and I. At I, it speaks to, that's page 17, Senator Braham. It speaks to the committee developing a child diversion program, taking into consideration the needs of children in rural areas, rural or remote areas. And I had recommended that we amend that, and the technical staff, Chairman, the technical staff are better able to guide you, but I think that it ought to be widened to include the needs of children in their particular locale, and do not limit it to rural parishes or remote areas. Please point me to where it is. Right. It presupposes, Chairman, that there are needs of children only in rural areas. and not needs of children in urban centers.
But F, yeah, please look at F.
Yes.
15F, be delivered in a location readily accessible to the child.
No, but that's a different provision, though, because F says to be delivered in a location readily acceptable.
Yes.
My understanding, right, so that speaks to where the child is, and so you're meeting the child at the position of his or her geographical need. And so if the child lives in Kingston, for example, then the program has to be developed according to F, so that the child doesn't have to leave Kingston. But at I, that's a different matter. At I, what it is saying is that you ought to take in, so for example, if you live in rural parishes and you may have, for example, say water challenge or light issue, then you consider those particular matters. And that is totally different from what is being provided at F. And so I would want you to keep the provision for take into account the needs of children in their particular locale.
All the elements are there when you look at, so A gives you the broadest heading, so it's there to be developed, administered, and supervised so that the best interest. And then there are also different elements like this, like as you have said, F and G. The G again is another location specific, and I. But I don't think there's a difficulty there. Those are different elements that would be taken into consideration. So where rural, then it's relevant. Where it's just generally a location and different aspects of how that has to be considered. Circumstances,
what I'm saying,
I'm not
Minister,
sure.
Minister, what I'm saying is it has specifically noted that you should consider the needs of children in rural areas or remote areas in a parish. But I'm saying that that is not enough, because you have to consider the needs of children in inner city communities. You have to consider the needs of children in urban centers. You have to consider the needs of children in middle-class communities. So I'm saying let us just broaden that provision to include local, or take it out if it already covers. If your understanding is that F covers it, then take out I.
G as well. I think maybe this was put in because there was a sense that there is always a focus on inner cities and urban areas, and that there needed to be an express recognition that rural areas and remote areas in parishes needed to be considered as well, because they are generally not always front of mind. So in the same way you're saying that no, the issue that is front of mind should be expressly stated, I think they put this in because it is the issue that is usually not at the forefront of the discussion. So I think that everything is covered there.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's the explanation. I will put
Chairman,
clause.
I guess the time is upon us, so you won't allow me to rebut. But
no, man. I put
the record, I don't
clause
agree.
15. Those in favor? Against? Clause 16. No amendments on the sheet, and I put clause 16. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Clause 17 I'm at. No, I don't put it yet. So I put clause 17. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'm at 18, which I put. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'm at 19. Those in favor?
No, Chairman. Go ahead, Lamit.
19, Chairman, has no discretion if a child, for some innocent reason.
Direct me.
19.1. The entire clause speaks to, and 19.3 speaks to a child not completing the diversion program. It doesn't, in my view, take into account whether the failure is willful, whether the child was supposed to have gone on the last day, but there's a roadblock in flankers, and not allowing the child to therefore get to the center. And so that is treated as a non-compliance. And I'm wondering whether or not some discretion shouldn't attend this section. Huh? I look at 3.2. It says. Yeah, so it's about willful. So. All right, I will go with that. I'll go with that if you want. I'll go with that.
Brown, you have a proposal to what you're trying to do is put a discretion in it, correct? No.
We will not pursue.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, good. So, no, it's not a question of good sense. They analyzed the thing and decided to accept it as it is. Section 19. Those in favor of 19? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 20. Those in favor? 20. 20. Those in favor? Against? 21. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. But you all need to be paying attention and go through this thing, you know. I can't be sitting here like a clown saying in favor, and nobody is not responding. Section 22. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Section 23, clause 23. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. 24. Those in favor, constable shall provide. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. There are amendments to section 25 contained on the sheet. And I put the amendments to 25. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put section 25 as amended. Those in favor? The ayes have it. There I'm at clause 26. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 27. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'm at clause 28. Those in favor? I'm sorry. Thank you. There's an amendment to clause 28 which I put. Those in favor? I'm informed it's not strictly an amendment, so I put clause 28. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Can I put 29 to 37? To 36. I put, thank you very much. I put 29 to 36. Those in favor? Come on, it's okay.
Just 32.
29 to 31. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'm at clause 32. Thank you, Senator Crawford.
Yes, sir. 32. It says the victim consent is required originally, right? But it also facilitates for there to be disagreement if the victim isn't in agreement that it might go to some arbitration. So the word required, I don't know if that is correct. 32.
No, listen, as I understand it, you know, it's required. Arbitration just suggests that there is some discussion further, but it's still required. In other words, the arbitrator cannot override the...
So I'm asking, if the victim don't agree that the child should go into that they...
It stands.
Therefore, they cannot go to diversion?
Go to what? Yes.
That's
what I understand. So
right.
The arbitration is not, the arbitration is a facilitation for further discussion. The arbitrator cannot say, I arbitrate and do this. As I
is the
understand
policy that the victim must consent for diversion to take place. Okay.
That requires one word, yes or no. So that's it. Senator Crawford, we passed that long time. I'm going to put clause 32. Those in favor? Against? I'm going to put 33 to 36 with your approval. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'm at 37 and there is an amendment on the sheet. That's what the amendment for 37. So I put the amendment to 37. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I put clause 37 as amended. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. Non-contentious, I think. Clause 38. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'm on clause 39 to 43. Those in favor? 39 to 43. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I am at 44.
44, Chairman. I just want to be clear on the policy in respect to the transitional period. That this is one legislation that's allowing some retroactivity. Is there a limit on the retroactivity? Because I think people need to know that this law will apply going back and not just going forward. So is there a limit on the period of retroactivity being contemplated here at 44?
It's not a period.
The word retroactive isn't there, but the intent of the act is that, as it says, subject to the provision of this. Oh, sorry, but the intent is there. You see, my people don't understand certain language. Kavan and I know back pay.
So, Chairman, I think the point that Senator Brown is raising is where it says that it has an effect and applies in relation to a child offender, etc., who was a child at the time of the conviction, as if the act were enforced. So there is.
So that is what gives it the
retroactivity.
That is what gives it the scope. Sorry, I cannot read this.
Don't need to sink into a quagmire on this. Can I have some clarification and put it, please, Senator Reid? There's a question asked,
There isn't a specific
is it an
date.
open-ended retroactivity? I think that is the question being asked. Yes, my lady.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there is no specific time, and it's going to be relevant to the circumstances. But the understanding of the scope that will be allowed will be impacted by the amendments to the Child Care and Protection Act and to the Parole Act, which are under the fourth schedule. Young inmate already states that it's an inmate under the age of 18. So that category of person who is already in the system is already designated by age. And the Parole Act would not apply to an inmate prior to the implementation of this act. So, meaning the amendment that's going to come under the fourth schedule. And of course, the child offender is already defined as well. So it really will allow for a very small window of persons who are children at the time of offenses in really fairly recent circumstances. So I hope that is sufficient clarity. So, but they didn't want to give a date because you might miss people who might otherwise be captured by the definitions.
It could be a decade less or more. At recent time could be a decade less or more. People commit offense at, they don't think it will miss long. But what's important, Chairman, is that as we make the sausage, we just need to explain to the people out there so they understand what we are doing in here, that we are making a law which has retroactive effect. Because most laws don't have that, so we want to make it clear that there's some retroactivity that people can benefit from.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown.
It's clear,
so
but not given 44. A date,
yes,
so that it will apply to the circumstances. No, but he was saying something
sausage,
about a decade, and I want to be clear.
The sausage must be clear, you know. So I put 44. Those in favor? Aye. Against? The ayes have it. I put 45. Those in favor? Aye. Against? The ayes have it. Section 2, clauses 2 and 7 are to be recommitted. Do I need to rise for 10 minutes to allow consideration of the matters so that we don't get into a quagmire again? There was an outstanding matter, Senator Scott Motley, on 2. What was the outstanding matter? Hang on, Senator Reid. This was a policy of President Morris, that he would move on, recommit, and then when they come back, I don't remember what I was quarreling about. Oh, yeah, but you never reminded me. All right, so, Minister, what you're saying about 2 there now? You're not making any amendment to it. So I put clause 2 now. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. There was an issue with clause number 7. There was an issue with 7. You were to take some instruction.
At 7.3, I had a proposal.
Senator Reid, are you saying that you're not amenable to my proposal? Oh, I wondered, because you just said no amendment. 7.1I. Yes, I think Chairman recommitted 7. I had proposed, let me just refresh your memory, Senator Reid. I had, you remember? So will you please provide the adequate guidance from Senator Braham? If he was making...
Obviously, it's not that critical, so I put clause 7.
No, I haven't gotten a response.
I have 1 on 7.
I haven't gotten a response.
Ladies, please, let's go.
Senator Reid, are you agreeable?
What is the proposal?
The amendment was that that a member of the parish committee sits at the National Child Diversion Committee. I think that's what I was saying. No, you have thrown me off.
But do you remember that they were to take instruction as to whether you would use or whatever, and I think you came back and said you weren't changing it. All right. Okay, so I put...
No, Chairman, I have a concern at 7.3. At 7.3, it says, in developing the recommendations under subsection 1, the Child Diversion Committee may consult with, and it lists along down to K, A to K. I wish to propose AL, either the universities or academia. Sorry? It says any person with experience, resource, or expertise in matters relevant to that. But it kind of catch all, but I believe, given the extent to which our universities exist, do this work, that we should specifically... I'm making a proposal. You can reject it as a minister with responsibility for the university.
That the universities
or academia be consulted.
And what he says is that any other persons you want to put it. Okay, so I'm putting Senator Brown's amendment, L, specific reference to the universities or any other area of academia or academic.
Clear.
Those in favor?
Just to be clear, Chairman, that would replace K, and K become the L with the catch-all. But I believe the universities need to, and we need to send a signal. What was it saying? Senator Charles this morning about the signals we send? Send a signal that we value our universities.
Thank you very much. So you have heard Senator Brown. Those in favor? Aye. Against? The noes have it. I put clause 7. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. There are amendments to the first schedule which I put. Those first schedule, the amendments to the first schedule. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the...
I want to speak on the first schedule, sir.
I beg your pardon?
I want to speak on the first schedule.
One.
Yes.
Okay, so...
Going to speak.
Yeah, but
in order to amend it, you'll have to speak.
Senator Crawford.
Yes.
Talk to me now. What is it? What's your problem?
I'm asking if there was a policy reason for the anti-gang not to be one of those recognized offenses.
Mr. President, let us be reminded that the first schedule speaks to minor offenses.
So that is the explanation. It's a serious offense that is not covered by the legislation. So I put the amendment to the first.
No. Sorry. In voting for this, I just want to be clear. You're saying that a child in school recruited into a gang and under pressure would not have the benefit of the child diversion.
Exactly what it is saying.
That's what I just want to be clear, because if that's what we're saying, I have a difficulty with that, because it goes against the grain of the legislation to save the children in conflict with the law.
Well, in an event, Senator
and what
Brown,
it appeared to me, yes, Senator Reid, is that we have gone for things to say we pass a legislation. Emptying chimney is what I don't know how much cases in the last 50 years of a child emptying chimney has come up, which has privy, Madam Clerk, and people don't really understand what privy is.
1 minute.
So
1 minute.
I think I understand the concerns that are raised, and this act in itself is a huge balancing act between how the society is dealing with the realities of the fact that we do have children who are involved in violent crimes, and a violent crime might not necessarily in all circumstances be the appropriate person to go into, to be taken into the diversion process. So what the Act provides is that in 37, it provides a court with a general discretion to assess the circumstances. So that if a child comes before the court and it is clear that this is in fact a child who is under pressure was recruited, no ill intent, probably has never held a gun, although associated with the persons, the court can still recommend that that child be part of a diversion, process. But a 16-year-old shutter, hardcore, might not necessarily be appropriately placed in a diversion process. So it's a tough balance. The act cannot be placed under here for that reason. That is a policy position. There's a broad discretion given to the court for that very reason.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, Chairman, I am very happy that the ministers indicated that the answer to our question is that it is possible. No, I'm just trying to be clear that it is possible for a child caught in a gang to be brought under the child diversion legislation, which is different from what we were being told earlier, that was a no-no.
But it was clarified.
And I'm happy for the clarification.
Chairman, for further clarity, based on what was said, a person charged for murder could equally be considered by the judge. Based on what was said, that the judge basically have clear competence based on their analysis to make suggestions for diversion, then you're suggesting that murder could also fall under 37. To understand that that is so.
Say what circumstances a judge would determine that a murder should fit under here, but if it is that a judge were to so determine,
I just need to be clear before we vote.
That's very clear. There's a broad discretion.
The answer is yes.
So, okay. So I put the amendment to the first schedule. Those in favor? Against? I put the first schedule as amended. Those in favor? Against? I put the third, did I say the third schedule a while ago? Did I just put the third schedule? I put the second. And there is a third schedule, isn't there? There is a third schedule at which I put. Those in favor? Against? I'm sorry, there are amendments to the third schedule which I put. Those in favor? Against? I put the third schedule as amended. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? The fourth? Oh, there are amendments to the fourth schedule. So this is not on this, you know. So I put the amendments to the fourth schedule.
Chairman.
I put the fourth schedule as amended. Those in favor?
Chairman.
Against?
Chairman.
Yes.
The fourth schedule. Minister, there is a movement.
So you want to recommit the fourth schedule?
But Chairman, I actually sought to get your attention.
Do you want to recommit it? No problem.
Yes,
the
please.
question is the fourth schedule be recommitted. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? The ayes have it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Minister, there is a move to separate our children from adults at our penal institutions. And I was hoping that what we would have seen would be an amendment to the Child Care and Protection Act, Section 68, that gives the court that power to place a child in an adult correctional center. Instead, I'm not seeing that, I'm seeing something else. And I wondered whether you were minded to consider that at this time, or whether it is something that I don't recall seeing it there, but I guess I'm getting a commitment from you that you will revisit the proposed amendments to the Child Care and Protection Act, because that committee is still on. Okay. The other thing, Minister, is in terms of the Corrections Act, I note that the manager is charged with the responsibility to design this child care plan. What I'm not clear on, and perhaps you can help me, is the relationship between the manager or the person implementing the child care plan, the parish divergent committee, if there is a relationship at all. You know.
That's an excellent response. Regulation. So. All right, thank you. Senator Fraser-Binns. So I'll put the fourth schedule as amended. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Mr. Marshall, stand by. Everybody is sleeping here. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. The question is, I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 13 amendments. Those in favor? Against? Report the bill as having passed committee stage with 13 amendments. Minister?
Mr. President, thank you very much. May I move for the third reading of the bill?
The question is that the question properly put by the minister is that the bill be read for a third time. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Facilitate the Implementation of Child Diversion in the Criminal Justice System and for Connected Matters, read a third time and passed.
Mr. President, as indicated earlier, it is intended to proceed with the resolutions, notice of which I gave, or rather, notice of which were given on my behalf last week by the Minister of Education, Youth and Information. So these are this is for affirmation, Mr. President, of the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 and the Public Procurement Reconsideration and Review Regulations 2018. Mr. President, you'll recall that the Public Procurement Amendment Bill was passed by this Honourable Senate last month, and that bill sought to address some reference issues in the Public Procurement Act and also to revisit some policy issues. I had indicated then, Mr. President, that we would have 3 sets of regulations to support the Act. 2 of them are being brought today because the third requires the establishment of the new commission, and that will only happen after these regulations are passed and the Act comes into force. So, Mr. President, I just wish to note that both regulations are formulated pursuant to Section 60 of the Act, and they intend to prescribe provisions on, among other things, the procedures, standards and criteria for the various methods and subject matter of procurement, the establishment, management and operation of an electronic procurement system, overall bidding proceedings and an appeal mechanism. Mr. President, the regulations that are not before us yet, the third set, and I just mentioned this so that no questions arise as to the scope of the 2 that are before us. The ones which are not yet before us are the ones that will consider issues which are often of concern to suppliers. So those are the concerns related to the forms, the fees and procedures for the registration or classification of suppliers, the evaluation criteria for qualifications required for the registration and classification of suppliers, and the circumstances under which registration under the Act may be modified, suspended, cancelled, approved, or withdrawn by the new Public Procurement Commission. So those matters that I've just listed are not in the two that are coming before us. And I raise them so that we're quite clear on the scope of the regulations before us. So, Mr. President, the Public Procurement Regulations 2018, which is one could consider them the principal set of regulations, those relate to Section 60, subsection 1, paragraphs A, C, D, E, and J of the Public Procurement Act. And they essentially relate to the procedures, standards, and criteria for the various methods and subject matter procurement, the bidding procedures and process, the provision of bid security, performance security, and any other security required in connection with procurement proceedings, and the execution of procurement contracts. They also relate to special and differential treatment measures and anything else required to be prescribed, of course, under the Public Procurement Act. Part 1 addresses the preliminary issues, of course. Part 2, which includes regulations 3, 4, and 5, relates to the administration matters, such as establishment of specialist procurement units by heads of a procuring entity. And specifically, these specialist units are to be staffed by persons who are qualified, competent, and adequately trained to manage and execute the procurement proceedings engaged in by a procuring entity. The regulations also prescribe the functions of the units, the manner in which the units are to be established, and the matters to be taken into account by the head of a procuring entity in establishing the specialist procurement unit. Mr. President, the administration recognizes that competence is a critical factor to ensure the effective and efficient implementation of this new regime, and it is therefore a key area of focus. We have to ensure that we have competent, well-trained staff manning the various procurement units, and I believe there are maybe 196 procurement units across the scope of the public service. So it's important that we systematize all that is being done to ensure that we keep standards high. Mr. President, we're not only codifying the rules, we're definitely seeking to build institutional capacity so that there will be continuity in the levels of understanding and practice of procurement, of modern procurement as well. Mr. President, Part 3, which encompasses Regulation 6016, prescribes public procurement procedures, so the processes which may be employed by a procuring entity. And these include open bidding, restricted bidding, and single source procurement. Part 3 also prescribes matters such as value limit thresholds, which are more particularly described in the first schedule of the regulations in relation to the procurement methods, procurement contract approval limits, and these are specified in the second schedule, and the content of documents like the invitation to bid, the fee for bidding documents, and the content of bidding documents. Part 4, Mr. President, which covers regulations 17 to 40, prescribes the procurement process, and in particular, the requirements for eligibility and qualification of suppliers. And you'll recall that when we made the amendments to the Procurement Act, that we made this distinction between eligibility and qualification to ensure that we're quite clear. Mr. President. Mr. President, Part 4 also prescribes the manner in which matters should be treated, such as the modification of pre-qualification or bidding documents, late pre-qualification applications and bids, and the clarification of pre-qualification applications or bids. Important, Mr. President, the procedure for the extension of bid validity is addressed specifically, as well as the securities that may be requested by a procuring entity, as mentioned before, bid security, performance, advance payment, and mobilization payment security. Mr. President, Part 5 encompasses regulations 41 to 48. The remaining regulations, but 41 to 48 prescribe, among other things, the objects of and set out special and differential treatment measures. So as indicated previously, Mr. President, these are measures that allow the government to give special consideration to certain classes of suppliers in public procurement, whether they be MSMEs or other categories, local business versus foreign, etc. So, Mr. President, the regulations set out how these will be addressed, and they set out that these can be facilitated by the issuing of orders. So set-asides, domestic margins of preference orders are, for example, currently being finalized and will be tabled in due course. Mr. President, Regulation 41 specifically states the objects of special and differential treatment measures as one, improving the distribution of wealth and income within Jamaica, so addressing matters of inequality, to reduce the costs of public procurement, including national development costs. And the regulation also provides that a special and differential treatment measures may be applied to a procurement proceeding that is fully funded by the government of Jamaica. Mr. President, it's important to note that the orders by which the set-asides and offsets or domestic measures may be considered, that they will be subject to affirmative resolution, and that they will prescribe the categories of Jamaican bidders eligible to benefit from the application of a domestic margin of preference, for example, and that percentage of margin. Mr. President, 3 schedules have been included in these regulations. The first addresses procurement method thresholds in support of Regulation 8. The second deals with procurement contract approval limits and supports Regulations 13, 33, and 34. And the third schedule, Mr. President, prescribes timeframes for prior notification of public procurement opportunities in relation to Regulation 39, as well as the requirement for publication of public procurement opportunities. Mr. President, the Public Procurement Reconsideration and Review Regulations 2018 provide for the very important processes of reconsideration and review. Under these regulations, an action or decision taken by a procuring entity can be reconsidered pursuant to Section 48 of the Act, or the Procurement Review Board pursuant to Section 51 of the Act. Mr. President, the regulations prescribe provisions that are authorized by Section 61F, paragraphs F, G, and H of the Public Procurement Act. And they relate to the reconsideration of actions and decisions of procuring entities, the procedure for the review of these actions and decisions by the Review Board, including its powers to make interim or ancillary orders, and provisions in relation to fees. So, Mr. President, Regulations 1 and 2 address the preliminary issues. 3 prescribes a process by which a person, firm, or entity, which is referred to as an aggrieved party for the purposes of these regulations, of course they're only related to review, how they may go about having an action or decision reviewed by a procuring entity, or to have a decision received from a procuring entity on an application for reconsideration reviewed by the Procurement Review Board under Section 51 of the Act. Mr. President, Regulations 4, 5, and 6 prescribe the actions that can be taken by a procuring entity on receiving the application, and matters such as the communicating of decisions to the aggrieved party, designation of a liaison officer who will perform certain administrative functions in relation to the application for reconsideration. And Regulations 7 to 41 prescribe the procedure to be followed by an aggrieved party in making the application for review, as well as a process where it's been received by the Procurement Review Board. Mr. President, under 35, it's important to note that the Review Board is empowered to dismiss an application for review at any stage if it is found that the application is frivolous or vexatious, or it's reasonably suspected to have been instituted to delay the outcome of a proceeding, or if for any other reason the board is satisfied that the review ought to be discontinued in the public interest. Mr. President, it also provides under 36 that an aggrieved party may withdraw an application even while it is pending. And 38, of course, allows for a party to be represented by an attorney or any other person. Mr. President, it's important to note that the Procurement Review Board is empowered to charge a non-refundable fee for an application for review representing a small percentage, 0.05% of the procurement contract, and this fee is deposited with the collector of taxes. Mr. President, the schedule attached prescribes certain forms which are to be used for a notice of review hearing, and when a witness is being summoned to appear before the procurement board, and when a notice to produce documents is being issued, as well as when a notification of withdrawal of review is being done. So there's a process that is in place that will allow for predictable transactions in these matters. Mr. President, in this context, without going into any further detail on the regulations, which I would take as read as they were tabled previously, I look forward to the support of colleagues in the affirmation of the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 and the Public Procurement Reconsideration and Review Regulations 2018.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown.
The regulations will find approval from the side because these regulations are intended to be part of the anti-corruption measures that our country have been trying to institute. In 1972-73, the Integrity of Members Act was passed, aimed at dealing with corruption amongst parliamentarians. We have subsequently passed Contractor General Act. We have passed Corruption Prevention Act. And we have set up these agencies. We have set up specific and particular police and anti-corruption agencies, FID, and I wish to commend them on the $85 million fine that they made recently. That seems to be one of those that is working. The procurement laws and the regulations are part of that continuous drive over decades to address the issue of corruption in our country, and corruption in high places in particular. Mr. Chairman, as one who has sat on public body boards, one of which the chairman of that board now sits in the Senate, as did the previous chairman, Senator Knight at that time,